everybody, I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at the Champions League match between Manchester City and Borussia Mönchengladbach, and let's get right into it. This will be made using Keyframe as usual. The link will be in the description below, but I got a lot of things I want to get through and I want to do it in a timely manner, so let's get right into it. So when Manchester City were in possession, Ederson, especially at the start of the game, would often come higher and form a back three in the build-up phase, which is nothing new for Manchester City. And then we see just ahead of them was the two holding midfielders via the inverted fullback that was made via Kyle Walker or Cancelo. Kyle Walker was holding the wide position in a more asymmetric back four situation, him being the deep or the fullback, oftentimes creating a back three through himself through the half spaces. And with this, the fullbacks really determined the initial build-up structure of Manchester City. So when Ederson wasn't in the back three, it was oftentimes Kyle Walker dropping deeper, either in the wide area or the half space, depending on the asymmetry that Manchester City used. And this build-up shape was very interesting against Borussia Mönchengladbach 4-3-3 that often in higher position looked like a 4-2-3-1 because of the jumping of their most central midfielder. So as we see the front three here, and then now we have a wide central midfielder just deeper off the screen and another one towards his right. So what this does is it puts them in close proximity to the double pivot with good spatial control, as we can highlight here. So Borussia Mönchengladbach, in their initial phase at least, looked to create a good amount of spatial control around the City double pivot via the inverted fullback and Rodri. So with this access blocked, there was no doubt that the ball would be then played into the wide corridor at some point, which often then favored in higher positions the shifting of the 4-2-3-1, because with a wide midfielder shifting and then the advanced central midfielder shifting with the weak side player also shifting across, it created about 12 to 15 yards horizontally between the three players. I would say 15 yards, which was more than enough space between the two of them to first control the majority of the central three corridors and create access to both central pivots. And now the one problem that they ran into at some points of the match was the affecting of the more advanced midfielders from Manchester City, as there were three of them at times, including Gabriel Jesus making the third. And these players and their flexibility would often show up in the wide area, creating an imbalance in the shifting of Borussia Mönchengladbach, taking advantage of the wide area. However, this was much better than being broken through the central corridors, because in the wide area it's easier to isolate play, and the weak side players would then drop in to create more cover towards the weak side, so the ball couldn't be progressed as easily. So now we just see Ederson joining the screen as we said he would, the double pivot, and a more emphasized shape of Borussia Mönchengladbach. As we see here, the two holding midfielders will be more towards the half spaces and taking the horizontal length and as reference points to the advanced midfielder. And then now we have our front three. So really a 4-2-3-1 here, but as we move deeper, it'll look more as a 4-5-1 or a 4-3-3, with the wingers creating access to the wide center backs. And as Kyle Walker drops deeper, this will affect the movement as well. But I just wanted to show you that. And to note, in the initial build-up phase, Manchester City had dual width via Kyle Walker on the same side as Phil Foden or Raheem Sterling, depending on the moment in the match. So here, as we mentioned, Gundogan coming out of the half space into the wide area to try and create space for himself between the central defender, which is Laporte on the left side, and the advanced winger, Phil Foden or Sterling, depending on the phase of the game. So with this, he looked to find space in these gaps between the broken connection of the winger and the fullback, but Borussia Mönchengladbach solved this problem through their holding midfielder on the strong side, shifting over, and then the weak side player would be holding the position around the 10 area, creating access to both two advanced midfielders left over from the shifting and movement of Gundogan. And now we see our front three taking place and our weak side player dropping into the midfield to create this horizontal and vertical compactness, as well as create this staggering between the players. If we include the deepest holding midfielder, we create this staggering to have multiple access points and higher level of spatial control on each side. So now, looking in a deeper situation, we have the 4-2-3-1, if you want to call it that, from Borussia Mönchengladbach. But I saw it much more as a 4-3-3 with just the most central midfielder jumping, just because of how he positioned himself in the offensive phase, often splitting two center backs, becoming a third center back in the offensive phase. I just felt he was more oriented towards the two holding midfielders rather than with the attacking wide midfielders in this case. So we have also Manchester City shape. Nothing really changed from recent games with them other than a few situational things within the match, playing against a new team, but all the principles and even a lot of the structural things were quite similar. There was more possibility and opportunity for Gabriel Jesus to drop between in the blind side with the most central midfielder jumping and the two wide defensive midfielders oriented more towards the players in the half space. So it gave Gabriel Jesus a chance to drop between them and create a third man concept with either of the double pivot. So looking at the build-up again, just because it was an important phase, especially early on, asymmetry between the two holding midfielders, nothing new, and then now Gundogan staying focused and into the half space with Gabriel Jesus just off the screen, as well as Bernardo Silva. So now we can look at it and look at the effect of Gabriel Jesus when he drops deeper to create this five-man midfield that we've talked about before. And with this, as Gabriel Jesus drops deeper, this would often be a huge indicator on the positioning of the Borussia Mönchengladbach player that we often associate with the second line between the two wide midfielders, and this is why I call it a 4-3-3 rather than a 4-2-3-1, because of the role that the most central midfielder plays in jumping to create access to two players now with Gabriel Jesus in the 10 space. The central midfielder cannot jump. He cannot jump because of Gabriel Jesus and then the dangerous space this would allow. So if he were to jump even just a little bit, this would create too much space, or maybe not too much space, but would create the possibility for Gabriel Jesus to get free between the lines and splitting and playing the blind side of the holding midfielders, as well as the front three now their main role will be to occupy the double pivot as the central midfielder drops deeper. So moving forward now, we can see that offensive transition was crucial for Borussia Mönchengladbach, and I predict that in the second leg it will also play a huge role. But in the offensive phase, when they lose possession, the positioning of Cancelo and Rodri is vital. So when they get pinned to both one side through movement or chasing a second ball, they're in the same central corridor in the half space. This creates a huge problem for them just because by them both playing in the half space, I'm going to try and highlight it here. By them both playing through the half space, this then opens up the other two central corridors for the Borussia Mönchengladbach players to then attack through and exploit the space, as well as the wide midfielders to then join the attack with the outlet as the center forward, attacking the back three. And we can see how this can create problems. After the Manchester City counter press is broken, the transition in theory looks to play through both half spaces. It looks to play through both half spaces to stretch the back three and isolate each of the wide defenders while the player on the ball drives forward to try and narrow them as the two wide players are trying to expand them, creating a lose-lose situation for Manchester City. But with the back three and the qualities of the defenders, they have the athleticism and the intelligence to then have Diaz be the cover player. So even if the ball was played past one of the central defenders, Ruben Diaz or one of the recovering defenders would be able to eliminate this attack, as well as the dropping players from Manchester City were able to easily deal with this. And now Manchester City in the defensive phase against the attacking phase of Borussia Mönchengladbach. Manchester City played a 4-4-2 in the mid-block and deeper. Higher up the field, they played a 4-2-4 just because of the numerical situations and their confidence to defend with numerical equality in the back, which we'll talk about with Kyle Walker jumping. But Borussia Mönchengladbach using Salida Volpiana to create a +1 numerical superiority in the first line against City's first line of pressure, and oftentimes using asymmetry in the midfield to create this staggered diamond, which would then lead to overloading usually the half space on the right side. If I have it correct, the overloads Borussia Mönchengladbach used was to overload and then a vacated half space on the left-hand side, for the most part, would then elicit more movement into this area, whereas the overloaded side would elicit more positional superiority. So I'm just talking about the first line of build-up, as everything typically extends from this point. Borussia Mönchengladbach go with the 3-1 or the 3-2, depending on the movement of this wide, more advanced 8, if we can call him that. He can often come as a double pivot to then exploit the space from a narrowed two-striker system, but often as well playing higher. So we see this positioning of the natural 8 and this numerical advantage in the first line to consolidate possession and secure circulation, as well as be able to properly defend in transitions. So as the ball is played, the press is initiated between the two forwards, and right away we see diagonal compactness forming to try and force possession into one area through the wide central defender at this point. So the trap is set for the wide central defender in the back three from Borussia Mönchengladbach. And with diagonal compactness, it makes it very difficult to play diagonal passes and break these lines of Manchester City in their defensive phase. Now, just looking at one more pattern for Manchester City, we have Laporte driving forward, affecting the front three from Borussia Mönchengladbach, narrowing them just slightly, drawing the attention of the central forward. So now creates the potential for Rodri to become the free player, and this paired with the marking system used by the midfield three, we see with the central midfielder jumping and his two holders behind him, it creates the possibility for Gabriel Jesus to then drop into a deeper area between defenders through the blind side, giving him an advantage, and then playing this third man concept between the three Manchester City players who I've highlighted here. So there it is, and then from here, the center defender can't jump because of the higher positioning of players like Gundogan and Bernardo Silva, pinning the back four as well as the wingers. So this third man concept will release Rodri and allow him to take advantage of a progressive pass with a numerical advantage higher up the field. Now, second half, a few things changed, but not drastically. Borussia Mönchengladbach did seem to have a bit more control in the second half of the game, especially early in the half, but we see just one pattern that City used very sparingly, and that was just Rodri dropping between the two central defenders, creating this asymmetry as we see Diaz more narrow in the right half space, Rodri in the central corridor, and Laporte looking to play through the exterior or the interior part of the wide area, just creating a longer passing distance in the circulation phase to ask a bigger question of the defense. So from here, we now see Kyle Walker and Cancelo dropping in as the double pivot, and when they play this role, it's a very different style of play because of the qualities of the two players. It's more favorable in a defensive transition to secure a counter-pressing situation, especially with Walker alongside Cancelo. So here, as we see, possession being narrowed, and in the second half, Borussia Mönchengladbach looked to have more players just beyond, or maybe it was just the width of the wide central defenders at times. They would often be in a more favorable position for the offensive transition because of these wide positioning of the two wide central defenders, or the asymmetric back four, however you want to call it. These players increasing the distance between themselves and Diaz just opened the door for a potentially more dangerous transition from Borussia Mönchengladbach, as it didn't turn out that way, but this will be something to look for to exploit in the second leg with a narrow front three and a wide back three. It could create the potential to exploit these gaps between defenders. And now, just one more situation of the back four being able to jump into the midfield when the situation was right, and with the fullbacks playing a little bit more narrow, gives more cover for one of the central defenders to then come and jump, and with high vertical and horizontal compactness from the defensive midfielders, it gives them more flexibility to be more spatially oriented and because of the spatial control they have, rather than tracking men and having to create numerical superiority in their last line of defense and letting Gabriel Jesus go free into the third man position. So now the last picture, just wanted to show the 4-2-4, which we talked about earlier on for Manchester City. And pretty typical with dual roles, and then now just a glimpse of the numerical equality with Kyle Walker jumping to create access to the fullback or wingback, as you might call him, in the offensive phase for Borussia Mönchengladbach. These dual roles and this jumping covers the blind side of Phil Foden because he's drawn towards the ball, and the wide central defender, as well as Sterling, drawn towards two players, and the two central strikers controlling the pivot area. So by Kyle Walker dropping, it creates just a little bit more security on this strong side where the ball is, and having the confidence to go with even numbers at the back because of the more pressure they want to establish around the ball higher up the field for a more positive transition. So that was the analysis. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and like, subscribe to the channel. That'd be a huge help, and I'll see you in the next one.